Nowadays, if you would ask someone what is the next emerging market, the next economy superpower, people will probably say something like China, India, Mexico, or even Brazil. And yes, those are very good guesses and are also right answers, but not many people would pick Indonesia, which is kind of strange to think about, because this beautiful country has 4th largest population in the world with 273 million citizens. Fun fact on the side, this country is also home to the largest Muslim population for a single country, with 12.7% of world's Muslims living in here. But you are watching this channel for economics, so let's look at it also. Currently, Indonesia is ranked as the largest economy in Southeast Asia, but their placement on global stage is not very flattering. They are currently occupying 16th place. Just to put it in perspective, 20 years ago, in year 2000, this country was ranked as the 27th largest economy. And what is even a bigger jaw-dropper is that only in year 2030, Indonesia is, according to OECD, predicted to become 5th largest economy in the world. So how are they going to do that? Well, they are already doing it. Firstly, we need to understand that Indonesia is in a very unique position, as they are not one big country, but rather a collection of 17,508 islands occupying very strategic location. But to understand their incredible future, we must understand how they grew so fast. Indonesia was first a Netherlands colony. After that, they were occupied by Japan during World War II, and after all of that, they were like, hey, we want to be independent and create our own prosperous country. So they gained independence, and between 1949 and 1960, they tried to create their own economy miracle. Do you think it worked? Well, of course not. It turned out that inexperienced governments are not really good at implementing macroeconomic policies, which resulted in the mid-1960s into giant economic chaos, with inflation rates around 1000%. Just for the comparison, target inflation rates are about 2% in developed countries. But don't worry, inflation wasn't the only problem Indonesia faced. They also had problems with shrinking export revenues, crumbling infrastructure, factories operating at minimum capacity, and negligible investments. Following President Sukarno's downfall, New Order administration brought much needed changes and finally, in 1968 to 1981, averaged yearly growth of 7%. In next years, from 1981 to 1988, they managed to pull only 4.5% growth, mainly because of declining oil prices. But don't worry, in 1989 to 1997, foreign investment flowed into Indonesia, particularly into the rapidly developing export-oriented manufacturing sector, and they could celebrate 7% annual growth once again. But in 1997, Asian financial crisis hit Indonesia very badly, and it is believed that some people from this country, even to this day, doesn't really believe in global economy as much. From 2000s to today, they overcome few minor crises but also big crises to be at this point. This government now once again decided to target 7% growth, but actually managed to pull out only 5% growth. Indonesia's government recognized that with this rapid growth over the years and massive urbanization, the infrastructure just wasn't prepared to handle this influx. It is estimated that Indonesia is in a $1.5 trillion infrastructure deficit, so they are definitely not having great infrastructure, which will decrease productivity massively. And decreasing productivity is a recurring nightmare in every economist's dream. This has simple explanation. Governments should try to create the best infrastructure so their citizens and companies can achieve the highest productivity level possible. Just to give you some simple example, imagine your morning commute to the work. Would you rather go through this, where you cannot get anywhere and delivering important stuff for companies like material is nearly always late because of bad infrastructure? Or would you prefer something like this? But Indonesia decided to battle this problem and developed a 10-year plan for building and renovating everything: airports, roads, ports and highways. They also created Jakarta mass transport system that is trying to ease pressure from the roads that were overwhelmed. But this isn't only change they wanted to make. Their biggest target is to finally move from commodity-based to manufacturing-based economy, producing more high-end products. But investors haven't invested into this area as much yet, and it has quite simple reason. Current labor market needs drastic changes, because nowadays it's very hard and expensive to hire or fire people, so not many big corporations are willing to invest heavily into this country until reforms in labor market take place. Indonesia must also focus on their soft infrastructure to create better education and healthcare for their citizens. Because as of today, Indonesia has a very low percentage of GDP going towards education, as you can see on this graph. For this year, Indonesia government proposed $35.51 billion for education in 2020. That is up 30% from 2015. These investments will be needed because luckily Indonesia has a very young population, and this can be also one of the main driving forces behind Indonesia's future attraction for foreign direct investments. Indonesia is also very tectonically active, which also translates into incredibly mineral-rich soils, perfect for farmers. But Indonesia is also blessed with the natural resources, for example coal or oil. Now this country started to fall down into resource trap and were exporting raw materials that are way cheaper than already processed materials. They were big exporter of crude oil and actually were member state of OPEC, but they left because of disagreement with cutting oil production by about 37,000 barrels per day, which would lower their total production about 5% annually. Now, very interesting is that Indonesia, with its rapid development, actually became net importer of the oil, and currently refined petroleum is by far their biggest import commodity. Now, if you think that Indonesia can simply become next manufacturing hub for higher-end products like electronics or medical supplies, we need to take a step back from this optimism for a little while. To create good, cheap products, you need a big workforce but also cheap labor force to make it economically possible to set up their factories here. But the ability to ship that goods is also very important. Here is the list of top 50 busiest ports in the world. China as manufacturing hub have 7 ports in top 10. Actually 8 if you would count Singapore as special administrative region that is part of China. In whole top 50, China has by far most ports, with 16. And how many places do you think Indonesia has at this chart? Only one, at 22nd place. Without this infrastructure, the cost of creating product may be cheaper, but shipping it will actually be way more expensive and slower than from China. But don't worry, which country is currently trying to help other countries with this exact same problem? You guessed it, it's China. But China is not doing this because they just want to help. Actually, their help is kind of unfair. They will provide the capital for building those infrastructure changes that will bring prosperity into those countries, but in some cases they will demand to retain ownership of those assets like ports, and in other cases they will charge some ridiculous interest rates. In many cases we are talking about double-digit interest rates. But don't worry, if you won't be able to pay off this loan, they will just take ownership over the asset. Now, is this growth sustainable? If we look at it closely, Indonesia didn't achieve their target of 7% for the last year and managed to pull out 5%. Very impressive for already developed countries like Germany, where their best growth years are being a little over 2%. It is obvious that this year their target won't be achieved. It will be the same for every country, although Indonesia will be probably hit severely. It is undeniable that Indonesia is a hub for tourism and attracts a lot of tourists. If you look at this chart that represents the arrival of tourists into this country, we can see pretty good year-by-year growth rate, where summer months bring the most amount of tourists. But during this crisis the world is currently facing, number of tourists coming here and mainly spending their money and supporting local businesses dramatically declined. It is estimated that average visitor spends 7.5 days in Indonesia and spends also on average $1,142, and only in last year Indonesia welcomed 16.1 million foreign tourists. This isn't even the biggest problem. When you have parts of your country dependent nearly only on tourism as main source of income and no tourists will come here, it will mean massive hit to local businesses and communities, which in worst case will create a massive chain reaction. Because if tourists are not spending their money here, businesses are not able to generate revenues and pay their employees. If employees cannot get their money, they can no longer spend and drive other businesses on the brink of bankruptcy. In 2019, Indonesia decided to do something big and move their capital city into East Kalimantan, which is province on island Borneo. This has very strategic location in the middle of Indonesia and is far away from potential natural disasters. This colossal move that is estimated to cost $33 billion will bring also new economic prosperity to this fastly urbanizing and growing region and potentially create other economy powerhouse in Indonesia like today's capital Jakarta is. Nowadays, it is undeniable that Indonesia will become economic powerhouse in near future. And with raising people from poverty and creating real middle class ready to spend their money, in addition to their large population, this country will simply become the place to conduct business for every major corporation in the world. If you would like to see how growing middle class of one single country will change entire economy of the world, definitely hit that subscribe button and turn off the notifications, because my next video will be exactly about this topic. But for today, this is everything. Have a nice rest of your day and bye.